Good morning, Paul. It's Thursday, the 13th of January. Here's a heads up brief for today. For the Southeast Asia production, we covered 23 issues. In North Asia, we covered 4, and for the Australasia and Pacific Islands, we covered 6 issues. In South Asia, we covered 12 issues, plus the major events in the Europe, Middle East, and Africa region.
Right, excellent. Thanks. Just give me the main ones as a heads up, will you?
Yeah, sure, Paul. So in Indonesia, thousands of people protested in Cianjur, West Java yesterday, demanding the government provide proper assistance to those affected by an earthquake in November that killed about 600 people. They also want the government to distribute the funds in an open manner because they're concerned about corruption.
with apparently a few precedents as to have such a concern. Okay, thank you.
Paul, the Corruption Eradication Commission seized gold and luxury vehicles worth nearly $300,000 from Lucas Enembe. He was arrested in Jayapura on the 10th of January for corruption.
Yep, the former governor. Very interesting indeed. Love to see more of these raids, especially on the west of Indonesia, where it's much more rife. But it's good that they have got one bad egg. There's a whole lot more floating through Indonesia, despite hundreds of arrests. And there's been a massive effort to water down the powers of the KPK, funnily enough, by the police who are constantly involved in corruption scandals. And I don't mean from the investigative end. Back to you, mate.
Right. Indonesian officials have said that the Papuan pilot who was arrested in the Philippines for firearms possession is linked to the insurgents in Papua, Paul.
Yep, and that was my assessment from the moment I dwelled on this one. Can't imagine for any reason why they'd go there other than if it was linked to such. But of course, we have to remain open on other possibilities, but I think it is indeed a linkage, and the weapon access is just too hard to get in Indonesia, so they'd be bringing them in through PNG or stealing them from the Indonesian forces, but trading in them is extremely difficult because it compromises members, hence the obvious place to go to get them is in the Philippines. So thanks for that. Keep me posted on that.
Right, Paul, will do. ASEAN will set up a special envoy's office on Myanmar to push for implementing a regional consensus on the country.
I'm not going to hold my breath on that.
Right. Paul, in Myanmar, a Chinese company plans to resume operations at a copper mine in the Saigon region despite objections from locals. There are also resistance forces active near the mine.
Well, it's inevitable as to what's going to occur there, and China's and indeed Vietnam are not big on vicarious liability for workers. They prefer just the dollars that chunk are coming out of the ground there. But I mean, this is going to be perhaps a catalytic event when the PDF and possibly even with EA, with ethnic armed organisation assistance, PDF being the People's Defence Force, or when they do an operation on China mines in Myanmar at some point, that could be a catalyst for companies that have continuing to be seen to be there, such as PTTEP. It could get nasty. Of course, PTTEP has taken over the operation of former Chevron operations in Myanmar, but what people don't get is Chevron's still a major stakeholder despite sanctions. Chevron's just like doing the pull out when you don't pull out, you just don't do the operation. So you're not vulnerable, you get someone else to do the operations that are vulnerable. And because they're tied, they're not perceived to be vulnerable to international NGOs and reputational issues, which of course is a fallacy. Of course they are, it's a publicly traded company. Then you've got the situation where PTTEP's releasing statements like we're doing that for energy security, which sounds good to wealthy stockholders in New York, but to the People's Defence Force, it's getting bombed, and the ethnic armed organisation getting bombed by its own government from airstrikes, probably perceive that as a bit of a cop-out. So Myanmar's going places. This next couple of years is going to be a very, very increasingly troubled time, particularly as the People's Defence Force gets some skill sets. Okay, back to you, mate.
Right, Paul. China said that it will continue the joint exploration with Philippines and Vietnam in the South China Sea, despite the Supreme Court in Manila stating that the agreement between them is void and unconstitutional.
Yeah, okay. Well, that's a never-ending merry-go-round, that one.
Right. In Thailand, Paul, one defense volunteer was killed and two others were injured in Narathiwat yesterday.
Okay, gotcha. Okay, that's ongoing. It's
Yeah,
ongoing fatalities there. No, no end in sight other than NGOs and governments banging on about how much progress they're making, but it's all smokescreen. There's no real tangible solution in sight. The people that are dealing with it are part of the problem, not the solution. Okay, thanks a lot.
Paul, assets belonging to the children of Myanmar's military chief were found in a police raid in Bangkok yesterday. Recently, in authorities were investigating a tycoon from Myanmar who was being investigated for drug trafficking and money laundering.
Yeah, and so now it's been implicated that the head of Myanmar Defence Force is also in cahoots with the tycoon and hiding assets using his own family. Surprise, surprise. Who'd have ever made that link, eh?
Right. Paul, from June, Thailand is considering collecting a 300 baht fee from foreign tourists entering.
Okay, let's watch them backflip on that when they realise that everybody will go to Bali or Maldives or somewhere else, because it's a tiny little bit of money, but it's just a very difficult thing to mentally for tourists to say, well, I'm getting taxed on arrival for the pleasure of coming to your country. It goes against everything Thailand is, which it is brilliant hospitality, extremely welcoming. I think this will be one of the inevitable and constant reversals made by government when they release information that sounds good until other people hear it, and it doesn't sound as good when there's pushback. But let's monitor it. Thank you.
Yep. Paul, lastly, for Southeast Asia, authorities in Singapore lifted restriction orders against three individuals who violated the Internal Security Act. Now, one of the individuals was a former member of the Jemaah Islamiyah.
Yes, and look, I mean, Singapore will have looked at this with great rigidity. They'll have done an in-depth analysis of these people. They won't make a token premature release. I mean, these guys, in fact, were released years ago. They haven't shown any deterioration. These guys don't present a threat. Would you agree?
Yeah, definitely, Paul. Singapore wouldn't just release them, as you said.
A lot of their neighbours may
Yeah.
and have and do regularly, but not Singapore. It's switched on in that regard. It's not switched on everything. Certainly not as switched on in terms of security systems and frameworks. And there's a little bit too much power at the top and not enough devolution of critical thinking, but on matters like this that are high-profile reputational issues pertaining to terrorism. Very low chance, like less than 0.01% that they bungle that one.
Yeah, definitely, Paul. Moving over to South Asia, in Kabul, at least 20 people were killed and 40 people were injured after the Islamic State Khorasan conducted a suicide bombing at the foreign ministry yesterday. Now, Chinese and Pakistani delegations and business attaches were inside the building when it occurred.
Okay, they're very concerning and not unexpected, but very concerning. Okay, thank you.
Yeah. Paul, in India, the National Investigation Agency arrested two suspected Islamic State operatives in Shivamogga in Karnataka. They haven't released
Yep.
further
Okay.
details on it yet.
Okay, just monitor that one and update myself and clients as an advisory or in the daily details, if you would.
Yes. Paul, in Pakistan, an Islamabad-based company announced that they've discovered new gas reserves in Sindh province. I'll send over details to you later today.
Yeah, I'd like to know how big that known reserve is and who are the various shareholders in that company. Be interested to see also what sort of agreement they have with the government. Is it I'm assuming it's a local company?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
In Bangladesh, hundreds of members of one ethnic community attempted to attack indigenous members of another community in Rajshahi over a long-standing land dispute. In a recent clash, 30 people were injured. Yesterday, police managed to contain the situation before it escalated.
Okay, so they didn't really contain it then.
Yep. Paul, in the Europe, Middle East, and Africa region, 6 people were injured in a knife attack at a main train station in Paris yesterday. The motive has not been determined thus far.
Okay, thank you.
Also in France, 8 major unions will jointly have been calling for a nationwide protest against the pension reform draft bill on the 19th of January. There's plans to involve nearly all the major unions in France in this protest. It seems to be a large one.
Sorry, when is that muted for, or we don't know yet?
The 19th of January, Paul.
Okay, great. Sorry, I missed that. Thank you.
No worries. In Germany, there's increasing tensions over a village in Western Germany. There have been clashes between protesters and security forces. Climate activists are also involved in the protests. The issue is it's an abandoned village that authorities want to raise for coal mining, but in recent weeks, hundreds of environmental protesters have gathered. They've also protested in Berlin.
Okay, I'm assuming that's raised to the ground, RAZE, as opposed to raise further development.
Yes, raised to the ground to get to the coal underneath.
Okay, gotcha. Excellent. Thank you.
In Spain, 2 suspected Islamic State terrorists were arrested in the southeastern part of the country yesterday.
All right, good. Thanks, Uday. That's great.
Paul, that's a brief for today. Anything else from you?
No, mate, I'll actually jump on the bunny mobile and hop off, but thank you very much for the brief.
All right, thanks, Paul.